Our gospel reading this week comes from Mark chapter 6, verses 30 to 34 and 53 to 56. The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. Jesus said to them, "Come away to a deserted place, all by yourselves, and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and he began to teach them many things. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized Jesus and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe on his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. In our Bible study this week, one of the participants asked, how did the people on foot manage to beat Jesus to his destination when he was traveling the lake in a boat? Surely the boat would have provided the most direct and shortest distance. We spent some time trying to figure out the logistics of how this was possible. We talked about the conditions of the Sea of Galilee and about the small, almost non-seaworthy boats of the time. And we wondered about the geography of the lake and the surrounding towns. In the end, this question of curiosity remained unanswered. Even if we couldn't figure out the logistics of how it was possible for the people to beat Jesus to his destination, it does reveal something. The people were motivated to get to Jesus. They were desperate for good news. You see, probably 99% of the people in Jesus' day lived a subsistence life. People in various trades lived from day to day. They were paid for their work each day, and that allowed them to buy food they needed for that day. The literal definition of daily bread. They didn't have any of the modern amenities that make our lives today easier or enables us to live longer and healthier lives. Furthermore, they were living under Roman occupation, which restricted what they could do and made their lives even more difficult. These people saw Jesus doing something new, and they wanted to be part of that. Their lives were so difficult and so filled with suffering that they were desperate for something new, for new life in mind, body, and spirit. And based on what the people had seen and heard about Jesus, they were certain that Jesus could provide the relief and complete healing that they needed. So it makes sense that they followed Jesus with speed and haste. Jesus and his disciples had been trying to find some rest because, as you might imagine, I'm sure they were exhausted from all their travels and all their work of healing and teaching and casting out demons. But when the crowd invaded their attempted retreat, Jesus didn't show any signs of frustration, and he certainly didn't dismiss the crowds. Instead, Jesus felt a deep compassion for the people before him. And this deep compassion Jesus felt didn't just end with Jesus simply feeling this nice, warm emotion. Our reading for today tells us that Jesus took action. He started to teach the people. He began to tell them all the things they longed to hear. He gave them hope. And these weren't just empty promises. Jesus demonstrated his deep compassion. In the verses that are missing between the two paragraphs in this reading, Jesus put his compassion into action in his miracle of feeding the 5,000 men, plus all the women and children that would have been present. And then the disciples were out at sea again. A terrible windstorm blew up. Jesus again put his compassion into action. He walked out on the water to where the disciples were in the boat, and he ended their terror and fear by ending the wind and waves and being present with them. Then the second part of our reading today tells us that Jesus continued to put his deep compassion into action, and he healed many people. The people who flocked around Jesus were so desperate for good news and for action that allowed them to live a life where they were protected and had well-being. This was not something they had been granted before Jesus came onto the scene. Jesus was the first to give them the possibility of a life where they might thrive. He showed them that they were human beings, worthy of dignity and respect. He demonstrated that they were loved, that they mattered, and that their needs should be met. For a while, Jesus encouraged his disciples and others who had witnessed his miracles to keep quiet about Jesus and about what he was doing. The danger to Jesus from the religious and political authorities was real and imminent. Jesus didn't want to risk the authorities knowing about him or knowing his whereabouts. He had work to do, and he didn't want to be arrested or killed yet. But clearly his efforts to keep his ministry on the down low were futile. Can you blame these people, though? They had experienced healing and hope and new life. Of course they went and told everybody they knew about what they experienced. And the curiosity spread and spread and spread. In fact, it spread all the way around the world to here, Livingston, Montana, in 2024. Remember that question of curiosity that we wondered about in Bible study this week? How did the people on foot manage to beat Jesus to his destination when he was traveling the lake in a boat? 2,000 years later, and on the other side of the world, we are still curious about who Jesus is and what he is doing. Who is this guy? And like those people who were overrunning Jesus and his disciples, we too remain curious about Jesus and his ways. In part because I think we too, like the people of Jesus' day, are desperate for good news. Daily we see the brokenness of the world and of our own community and our individual lives. In our adult education sessions the past few weeks, it's been really powerful to hear about hunger and the challenges facing students and families in our county. I was surprised by some of the statistics that were shared. Nearly half are students living in poverty and in hunger. But I was also delighted to learn more about the creative and abundant ways that God is working in our community. Jesus continues to show deep compassion. And Jesus shows deep compassion to every person in our community and in the whole world. And he does it through us, his disciples. Remember a few weeks ago in our gospel reading, Jesus sent his disciples out 2 by 2, out into the world. And in our passage from today, people rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats to wherever they heard Jesus was. People are playing a role. There were people who played a role in getting the sick people to Jesus. They ensured that all people had access to the life-saving and life-healing power and presence of Jesus. And that's what we too, as Jesus' followers, are called to do. Jesus sends us out into the world. It will almost certainly look different than physically bringing sick people to Jesus on mats. And so I wonder what role we as individuals and we as a church might play in our community to bring people to Jesus. That doesn't necessarily mean bringing people into the church building, although it might. But it does surely mean ensuring that people are able to hear and experience the life-saving and life-giving compassion of Jesus. I think back to those people who are hungry in our community, or those who are disconnected from where their food comes from, the people who don't know where their next meal is coming from. I think about the students who are homeless, students who fear for their safety at home, students who don't have what they need to succeed in school. I think of families who are stuck in the cycle of poverty, or families and students who are impacted by addiction or other mental illness. These people who live in our community are desperate to hear good news, and they long to experience the sort of healing that Jesus can provide. And it is through us, through you and me, that people can and will experience Jesus' love and grace and healing. Let it be so. Thanks be to God. Amen.